Hello everyone and welcome. This video will cover AP Style Books reference on numerals. So some students may get confused about what is a numeral. A numeral is just a number. It is the Arabic form of the numbers 1, 8, 10, 5,923. So this is when you're using the actual number as opposed to a word. If I'm telling you to spell it out, though, I mean using the actual word format. So 1 would be O-N-E, 8, 10, 5,053, and so on. So the general rule in AP style is for numbers under 10, you're going to spell them out. You also don't want to start a sentence with a number, generally speaking. You can use the numbers or the numeric form of numbers 10 or above. So anything from 10, 16, anything into the millions, those you would typically want to use numeric form. You should always use figures for numbers over 10, units of measure, and tables, statistics, sequences, things of that nature. Now, there are some special rules for various kinds of numeral form. Now, with addresses, we almost always use the number when we are writing an address. So for Privet Drive, remember you're going to spell out numbered or ordinal streets, such as it's on 5th Avenue. Instead of putting 5th, you're going to spell out 5th. And you only use abbreviations of avenue, boulevard, and street. With numbered addresses, you would spell them out if not numbered. Remember back to the abbreviations lesson for that. So in terms of age, we typically almost always use the number. The only exception to this rule is if it's an inanimate object, if it's not living, like the house is 10 years old, well, 10 would still be a number, but if the house is 8 years old, then you're going to spell out the word 8. Now, one of the common uses would be 6-year-old girl. So you're still using 6 as a number instead of spelling it out because it's an age of a person. You will use hyphens for ages that are adjectives or substitutes of noun, such as it's a 5-year-old dog or the 5-year-old drove the car. So here the top one is an adjective, the bottom one is a noun. So therefore you would use the hyphenated version. However, if you're referring to if you're not using it in adjective or noun form, it's 5 years old. That is a subject complement, and so therefore you're not going to use the hyphens. And also when you're offsetting the age as a non-essential clause, then you would also not use hyphens to dictate that. A good rule of thumb is if there is an S on the back of years, then you will not hyphenate it. Years, dates, and decades almost always use numbers. Make sure that you spell out the month, but you can abbreviate a date if the month has 5 letters or less. So the months of January, February, and then August, September, October, November, and December will be abbreviated, while the months of March, April, May, June, and July will never be abbreviated because they are not more than 5 letters. Make sure you put a comma between the day and the year when using a full date as shown above. Now, class of 66, this obviously is referring to the year 1966, but we would use an apostrophe to take out the first 2 numbers of the year to shorten it. In addition, when you're talking about a decade, like the 1960s, you would not use an apostrophe to refer to that decade. You just use an S. In terms of centuries, figures for numbers 10 or higher, and then spell out 9 and below. So 21st century, and the 5th century. It's good to know that centuries should always be lowercase. Time is typically always written in the numeric format. So 1 p.m., 10:30 a.m., 5 o'clock. If you're timing something and you're wanting to give out its full time, 8 hours, 30 minutes, 20 seconds. The only exception to the time rule using numeric figures is noon and midnight. You're going to use the words noon and midnight to refer to those exact times. Numbers less than 10 that stand alone or in modifiers also need to be written out in word format. So I'll be there in 5 minutes. Here we're not referring to a specific time, and so therefore the number is standing alone, modifying the number of minutes, and it would be written out. He scored with 2 seconds left. It's an 8-hour day. Those are not specific times of day. They are a length of time. And so those would be word format instead of numeric. Court decisions and votes will also use figures. It was a 5-4 vote. Notice you don't use the word to unless you're directly quoting someone, such as he said the court ruled 5-4. You're going to spell out when the vote is a modifier, so a 2-vote margin, because 2 is modifying vote. It is describing how many votes. Therefore, it would need to be spelled out instead of using the numeric format, but in all other court decisions and votes, you would use figures. Court and political districts are typically numbered ordinally, which means 5th, 3rd, 9th, etc. Decimals, percentages, and fractions larger than 1 will use numerals, such as a 7.2 magnitude earthquake. Decimalization should not exceed more than 2 places for the most part. So if you're using the number pi, which is a lot of lines after the decimal point, you would only use 2 in AP style format. So it'd be 3.14. The exception to the 2 decimal places is content that is regularly expressed within 3 decimals, such as blood alcohol level or batting averages. Those are the 2 most typical ones. Amounts less than 1 should include 0 before the decimal. So the cost of living rose 0.03%. You would need to put a 0 in front of the decimal place. This is really for clarity. Remember, AP style is all about helping your readers with clarity. So it makes more sense to know that it is 0.0 something, because that allows your reader to kind of place where it is in the spectrum and know that it's not just a typo. It is important to note that after the 2019 version, AP Style actually changed their use on the word percent. It used to be that you needed to spell out the whole word percent, P-E-R-C-E-N-T, but now we can use the percentage symbol. So you can use the percent symbol now. You will also spell out fractions that are less than 1, and for numbers more than 1, such as 2/3. But if the number is more than 1, such as 3.5 laps, then you're going to use numbers for it. So if it's less than 1, spell it out. If it's more than 1, use numbers. In terms of dimensions, we regularly report inches and feet using figures, using the numbers. So 5 feet, 6 inches tall. You're going to use hyphens when it's an adjective or implying something. So he's 5'6". Here, inches is implied, so we're hyphenating it. 9x12 rug, we're talking about feet most likely, so it's implied and we would hyphenate it. The 7-footer is a great basketball player. We're using a 7-footer here as a replacement noun, and so 7-footer would be hyphenated, while he is 7 feet tall, where 7 feet is a subject complement, you would not hyphenate it. It snowed 9 inches. We're describing how many inches it snowed, so therefore we would not be hyphenating it, but a 9-inch snowfall is an adjective and therefore it would be hyphenated. So um, hyphens and numbers can be confusing, but typically when they are adjectives implying information or replacing a noun, then you'll hyphenate it. Monetary units are almost always expressed with numbers. So 5 cents, a $5 bill, 8 euros. And specifically, and this is not just for money, but for any use of millions, billions, or trillions, you will not hyphenate it. You will spell out the designation, such as million, billion, trillion, and not just use a symbol. So $5 billion, you would use the number for how many billions, or 1 million people, you still use the numeral there instead of spelling out 1. Sequential designations are also using numeric form, such as page 1, chapter 8, act 3, scene 4. But if you're describing something like it's line 1, that is like a replacement noun. But if you're saying it's the first line, that's less, that discusses less about sequence. And so you actually spell out the word first. Third and fourth scene, same there, because they're ordinal, you would not use the number, you would spell it out. Best of 7 here is not describing which designation in the sequence there is. You're talking about there being 7 games total, so therefore you would spell that out. School grades follow where 1st through 9th are spelled out, but 10th and above use numerals. So you will also typically use numbers for distances, golf clubs, highways, math, odds, ranks, and speeds. So refer to your AP style book about specific rules with those. Here are some of the things that you typically spell out with numbers. So we know that the numbers 1 through 9 are typically, as a general rule, spelled out. The start of a sentence, because you don't want to start your sentence with a number, you are typically going to spell out any number that begins that sentence, or rewrite the sentence so that the number is not starting out the sentence. The exception to that rule is if you're using a year. If you're saying like 2020 is the worst year ever, 2020 is still the start of the sentence, but because it's a year, it's allowed. And then numeral letter combinations such as 3D would be allowed to start a sentence. Casual uses of some of the exceptions that we talked about, like thanks a million, one day we'll know, dollar store, things like that. Here you're always going to spell out the numbers. Proper or popular names are typically spelled out, such as the Final Four, the Big Three, the Chicago 7. Formal language, if you're quoting something or talking about an older document, typically you will still spell out the number. So 7 years ago, 10 commandments. Fractions less than 1 are also spelled out, which we discussed earlier. Ordinals are the numbers that rank. So again, we still follow the same rule where typically we spell out 1st through 9th, and then numbers starting with 10th and above are actual numerals. This is why school grades follow this pattern. Roman numerals, we try to use very sparingly. A lot of times they can get mistyped within a print copy and AP style, so we tend to not want to use them. However, we will use Roman numerals with wars, such as World War I and II, personal sequences when talking about someone whose name follows a sequence, such as King George III, or certain legislative acts like Title IX.
So now that you understand a little bit more about AP style of numerals, make sure you do the homework, which will be due Wednesday, September 16th at midnight, and then read Chapter 8 on alternative news leads.